Welcome to Libertarian Counterpoint. I am Lee Welter, filling in for our usual panel host, Richard Fields, who's enjoying a lovely vacation. I'm pleased to have our panelists today, which include John Cameron, Development Officer for Pacific Legal Foundation, and an attorney for Pacific Legal Foundation whose focus is on individual rights. We love it as libertarians. It's the right thing. And every individual should value their own individual rights and be grateful that there are people such as Wen Fa helping protect those rights. And one of those protections includes keeping us safe or minimizing the abuse from government bureaucrats. I thought the government was here to protect us, but that's not necessarily the case, is it, Wen? California bureaucrats abdicate duty 233 times. Pacific Legal Foundation sues. I don't totally understand what that means, but I'm sure you're going to explain it to us. 233 times.
I am absolutely going to explain that right now. So what happened is the California Department of Fish and Wildlife is a California agency that administers the California Endangered Species Act. So it lists animals and plants under that act as threatened or endangered. And it has an obligation under the CESA to conduct 5-year status reviews of all of those species, because otherwise, how would you know if a species is no longer endangered or threatened, or if a species which had been previously listed as threatened is now endangered? How would you make sure that those listings are up to date? And what the California Department of Fish and Wildlife did was nothing. It conducted 5-year status reviews of only 2 of the 235 species, leaving 233 species unreviewed for the last 5 years.
I think I understand a little bit of this, and that is motivation. Is it likely that the more species that are under their domain, that the more power and discretion that the bureaucracy will have? Is that, did they benefit from that? Yeah. And especially if they keep people uncertain, then the frightened people behave in unfortunate ways.
I always suspect I'm a cynic when it comes to government, because governments typically do something. There's a stated reason and an unstated reason, and it turns out that in many cases the unstated reason is the actual reason for doing things. So I have a couple of questions here, Wen. So there's a California Fish and Game that's responsible for a California endangered species list, or is this a federal list of? I'm confused. Is there 2 different lists?
There are 2 different lists. There's a federal list and a state list.
Oh,
so
joy.
There's 2 bureaucracies doing pretty much the same work. And we know, and that's one of the reasons that we know that at least some of the species listed are outdated, because they have conducted 5-year status reviews under the federal ESA, and they've actually downlisted some of these species.
Downlisted means that they've gone from, if I understand it correctly, to endangered to threatened, or threatened to not threatened.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
So what are their own interior regulatory requirements? They have all government agencies are required by their own regulations to do certain things.
Right.
So if I'm correct, what you're saying is that their own requirement states that they're supposed to do these reviews every 5 years, and that they have basically not done the jobs that they say they're paid to do.
Well, the state legislature who wrote the law actually requires them to conduct reviews every 5 years. So they're not following the law as enacted by the state government.
So if you or I were to violate a law, we'd probably be arrested and go to jail. What consequences are there for these people for violating the
None
law?
so far, and that's what we're trying to do at the Pacific Legal Foundation. We're there for individual liberties, and we are there to ensure that the rule of law is upheld. And it is absolutely inexcusable for the department to not follow the law 233 times, as you said earlier. It's as if we obeyed. We stopped at a red light twice and ran it 233 times.
So of all of the species that are on that list, 200, there's how many total species?
Well, there's a little bit more than 235. Some of them haven't been listed for 5 years, so our complaint doesn't deal with that. But there are 235 that have been listed for over 5 years, and they've only conducted reviews for 2 of them.
So less than 1% of their requirement has
Right.
been fulfilled.
Absolutely.
Well,
Wow.
I have a couple of questions. One is, if you're successful in your suit, is there any sort of punishment? Do these people pay out of our tax money for their sins, or is there any individual accountability ever in a government bureaucracy?
We just want the government to follow the law as written by the state legislature,
So
and that's what
a
our-
mandate for them to do what they should have been doing
That
all
is-
along.
That is exactly what we're asking for.
Now,
Well-
what are some of the consequences of them not doing their job? Because the Endangered Species Act, as I understand it, has huge impacts on farmers, on developers, on all the rest of that. So what kind of impact is this having on people trying to earn a living?
Right. Well, as you know, if a species is listed as endangered or threatened, there's all sorts of property restrictions. For example, if you want to develop somewhere and there is an endangered species at that place, then you might not be able to develop at that place. And I don't really quibble with that in terms of if a species is actually endangered and serious threat of going extinct. But keep in mind, some of these species listed are actually thriving, as we know from the federal status reviews. So it makes no sense to stop a developer from being able to develop land, especially in this economic climate in California, when just to protect a species that is actually thriving in the state.
So is there an example of a species that might be thriving? Do you have
We listed
examples?
7 in our petition. One of them, I think it was the Modoc sucker, and we listed.
So that sucker's doing fine. then. Sorry, I just
Great
I
quote.
had to do that. The sucker's doing fine, and it's still on the list.
I recall during one of our typically dangerous fire seasons, a farmer was plowing a fire break along the perimeter of his property and endangering the habitat of some strange animal that I'd never heard of before and punished for it. Wouldn't the forest fire cause a lot more damage than just plowing a fire break? Are there any exceptions for that sort of activity?
There are some exceptions, but the Endangered Species Act, both federally and on the state level, imposes onerous restrictions on everyday citizens. My colleague Jonathan Wood has a similar suit in Utah about the Utah prairie dog, and unfortunately the camera is not getting the full side of my great face right now, but my colleague Jonathan
Now
Wood,
it is. Now it is.
my
You're
colleague
there.
Jonathan Wood has a case dealing with the Endangered Species Act, the Federal Endangered Species Act in Utah, the protections for the prairie dog there. And basically what's going on is that these prairie dogs are showing up at funerals in the state of Utah, and people can't even shoo them away from the funerals of their own loved ones without risking jail time for that.
We're going to the dogs, sort of
Ouch.
sad.
Ouch.
Well, now, on a more optimistic note, and I say that as a libertarian, optimistic in that we're roughly 2 months away from a big national election. We have what I call the bipolar political party that pretty much controls things, and we have some
The Republicans
alternatives.
or the Blamocrats? Which
You
one?
got it,
Both of them?
exactly. And on the 15th of August, which was last month already, a couple weeks ago, the Gary Johnson, William Weld campaign sought contributions because they want to get enough publicity, despite all the obstacles, intentional obstacles by the big two, we might call them, to get into the debates, the well-publicized public viewing that gives people a sense of whether they're dealing with a career criminal, a successful egomaniac, or a couple of very successful governors, two-term governors in states where their party was not predominant and did so very successfully. And That's Gary Johnson and William Weld. They asked for their supporters to contribute $15 on August 15th in order to get to that 15% in the polls, which qualifies them for the debates. Mm-hmm. And I'm really skeptical. I'd like to be optimistic, but I'm skeptical because the barriers are so great. And my idea is sort of weird. You can tell me what you think. I think a television channel that includes Weld and Johnson addressing the same issues, not necessarily in the same venue, but on the same show, maybe a split screen, explain their point of views, might give it even more viewers. If you could see somebody besides Mr. Trump and Mrs. Clinton, well, I know we'd prefer that, but what do you think of that?
Well, I'd love to see it, but I think you're right that the deck is stacked in the favor of the one political party that's basically labeled either Democrats or Republicans. It's all big government and special interests, and the status quo makes money for an awful lot of people, all the government unions, all the government contractors, and everybody else. So I don't know if it's going to happen, but I think it might happen in spite of the wishes of those in power. What do you think, Wynn? You think it's going to happen? You think you'll hit that 15%?
Well, I don't have a strong view on the politics coming up in November, but I do know that as a small L libertarian, we are very excited at Pacific Legal Foundation, our organization. As you know, today we just welcomed a new president with Steven Anderson, with lots of energy, with big ideas for the liberty movement, and a innovative strategy to take on the Leviathan. So if you know the thousands of viewers who watch this show don't already do so, they should follow us on pacificlegal.org and on our blog at blog.pacificlegal.org.
Say that again. Can you say that?
Blog.pacificlegal.org. And when you have a couple of pretty good blogs on there yourself. So, and I work for Pacific Legal Foundation. We are not a political organization. And we're frequently labeled as a conservative organization, and neither Wynn nor I speak for Pacific Legal Foundation. But when Wynn brings up individual liberty and our new president taking on Leviathan, as he calls it, what he's talking about is our mission to guarantee constitutional rights and take back lost rights that all these massive bureaucracies. We've already talked about some, the school systems, the fish and wildlife. We haven't even touched on some of the worst, the Army Corps of Engineers or the EPA. These are people run amok. And so it's my understanding that what we do isn't political, unless you can call defending the Constitution of the United States politics.
Is liberty and justice a bad thing now?
Well, no, but I just want to point out that it's not. We support neither the left nor right nor the libertarians. What we support is the Constitution of the United States, and if we do our job effectively, I'm a development officer. Development officer is a euphemism for fundraiser.
Well, that's valuable.
But if I can help us get the capital to have energetic, highly talented attorneys like Wynn in the courtroom, or many times it's not even necessary, just filing a beautiful brief or even a wonderful amici, which you might want to explain to people because it's a wonderful tool. Then the politics don't really matter. Because if we can enforce the Constitution and take back the Constitution, then it doesn't really matter who's in power. Our liberties are going to be given back to us and guaranteed in the future. Could you
have a slightly different perspective when you talk about the government giving us our liberties?
No, what I'm saying,
we're born with our liberties.
No, I know. I'm not. I didn't mean to say that. What I'm saying is
giving us our liberties back. Is what you mean.
What I'm saying, we're trying to
stop violating our constitutional rights.
Because they are. That's right. Well put. Because these government bureaucracies, these massive, bloated, misguided beasts with thousands of employees and unlimited resources, our tax dollars, have taken our rights that are guaranteed. to us by simply being born, much less the Constitution of
Don't
the
you wish
United States.
everybody in the world had that same privilege?
Inalienable rights. It says inalienable, but they've been alienated. And so that's what the organization does, try to take it back. And I'm sorry I jumped up on my soapbox, but I want to make sure that the viewers understand that we're not espousing one political viewpoint or another as employees of Pacific Legal Foundation.
No, it
I
just
wanted
happened to
make sure
be
of that.
compatible or congruent. And
Definitely.
We will not deny that. And there's nothing wrong with small L libertarian whatsoever. And
I don't
I'm
even
trying to
if
be
it's
fun.
silent L libertarian, I'm
Yes.
okay with it.
I'm befuddled by the people who talk about group rights. And in my view, those are people that are collectivists. They think that bigger numbers and more threats of violence give them some privilege that none of the rest of us possess. And I'm violently, well, no, I wouldn't say violently. I'm
No, you don't want to say
adamantly
violent.
opposed to
You know
that.
what? With a nation that has a department called Homeland Security, I think you should be very careful about saying. the word
Definitely
violently.
that. Yes, in fact, we can make a little jump here to a threat. I don't know if it's a threat or a warning that the Department of Homeland Security considers our election system is a critical infrastructure, which lets them put their nose under the tent, presumably. You think that's a real possibility?
Boy, I sure hope so. With the Homeland Security has demonstrated one thing, and that's that they're horrible at their stated mission of protecting people. I mean, the TSA falls under the umbrella of Homeland Security. In the latest audit, when people tried to get illicit, illegal, or dangerous items through TSA screening, TSA failed to find them in 95% of the cases. So if these are the same people that are protecting our critical infrastructure, then I'm scared for our critical infrastructure. But what I'm really worried about is this, is that if they stick their nose in, monitor is the first step before control. So if they have their hands on the election system to protect it, then I'm extremely worried that they'll have their hands on the election system to direct it, and that scares me.
Yeah, and there's a lot of claim that there is no vote fraud. And John Funn's book titled Stealing Elections reveals very clearly that vote fraud is far more prevalent than we would like to think, or that most people realize. And we have court ruling against photo ID. Can you cash a check without a photo ID?
I don't know the last time I wrote a check, but I know what you're trying to say is. So I don't understand it. How
can you board a plane without a photo ID?
So you can't. The most, I think, because government is so massive and so powerful, that one of the things that you absolutely need to do to keep government out of your house, your home, your bedroom, and your pocketbook is vote. And if an ID is required for as simple as thing as getting a driver's license, or as you said, cashing a check, or buying a beer,
or boarding a plane,
or boarding a plane, or even confirming your identity as you make any commercial transaction, then it should certainly be required that you prove that you are who you say you are when you cast a vote that controls somebody's well-being, their life, whether they're drafted or not, whether abortion is legal or not. Hugely important issues. So I think it's ludicrous that people aren't required to prove that they are who they are before they push that button or pull that lever.
But I could take exception to one of your comments that the TSA employees are truly doing the best they can, and it may not be perfect, but I can confess I've lost 2 jackknives that I didn't realize I had with me in my backpack or my fanny pack. One was a little tiny one like this, couldn't have hardly done any harm, and one was a little bit bigger, a Swiss Army knife, and I regretted that. I could have gone back and checked it in with the checked luggage, but it just didn't seem worth it.
Well,
time and money.
and I don't want to rant and rave about TSA, but my experience has been just the opposite. I used to travel quite a bit for business and put on training, and as such I had my laptop and all my connecting cables and my video projector and microphones and all the rest of that. And I would go on some trips by car throughout the western United States, and on those trips I would take my Leatherman with me, which is a knife with a bunch of other nice tools, and I forgot to take it out of my pack and went on a series of short flights. And my Leatherman went with me the whole time, and I only discovered it in a hotel at the end of my trip. And it went through screening and X-ray and screening and X-ray and screening and X-ray and screening and X-ray. Then I had to check my bags going back in case it was. But we're getting out of the point. You know, that I'm concerned that, again, my major concern is that if the Department of Homeland Security starts to monitor, it will only be a short period of time later when they take control under the guise of monitoring or protecting us.
Okay.
That's my concern.
There's a very important message that we can't tell people how to vote, but we can tell people to vote, unless you're already dead, or unless you've already voted at least once or
many
once
people
or
who have voted
more.
in past elections are dead.
Oh, yes.
That's been proven.
Yes,
Yeah,
and the
yeah.
courts have kept dead people on the voting rolls. They kept felons on the voting rolls. In fact, isn't there a governor in one of those eastern states that gave felons the right to vote?
Well, and see, I actually don't have a problem. I know we're going far afield, but I don't have a problem with felons voting. And here's why. If you're convicted of a crime, you serve a sentence, and that sentence is supposed to be your penance for that crime. And many times there are civil requirements where after you pay back your victims. And when you're done with that sentence and done with that crime, because you're a felon, you are prohibited from entering into many jobs in the labor force, and you are in essence blocked from many avenues of gainful employment. You're blocked from being able to own a firearm to protect yourself and your home, and in many areas where felons live, that's absolutely necessary, yet if they're found with a gun, they'll go back to prison. You're blocked from voting, and we're talking about discrimination. If you're a young black male in this country right now, there is a 1 in 7 chance that you will spend time in prison. And if you spend time in prison, it will be for a felony. It's not for a misdemeanor, which means that 1/7 of the male voting population that is black will not ever have the opportunity to vote. And that is discrimination rampant, I believe. Yeah, when you look like you're going to say something, I kept talking, so I don't.
All right. Well, I think we're moving on to the next topic.
Well, actually, I was just sort of led into one. I'm taking these out of the order that you see them printed on the sheet in front of you. You folks can't see them, but that's all right. A recent news item is in the sports department. San Francisco 49ers Colin Kaepernick claims that he does not feel it appropriate to stand and respect our flag as the national anthem is being played. And the league said he has the right to do whatever suits him best. And his complaint or his intent is to put direction or attention onto the abuse of the black community. And in a way, I agree with him. The African American or black segment of our population was doing much better in the 1950s and early 1960s until Lyndon Baines Johnson created what he called the Great Society, a war against poverty. Mm-hmm. We've spent trillions of dollars and we haven't made any progress, but in fact, we've created dysfunctional families. Said, no, the father's there, you can't collect your check. You have to have single-parent families, and fathers can't be part of the equation. That's almost a guarantee of dysfunctional youth. It's unfortunate.
And at Pacific Legal Foundation, we talk all the time about how government regulations hurt minorities. For example, we, as I said, either last week or next week, depending on the scheduling, that that school choice, for example, Pacific Legal Foundation
That's
does
a
a
big
lot of
one.
school
Exactly.
choice.
They're trapped in schools that don't serve them
Right.
very well.
A lot of poor students, predominantly underrepresented minorities, are trapped in these failing public schools with no way of getting out, no hope for the future. Same goes with occupational licensing requirements. There are loads of unnecessary occupational licensing requirements in the United States, and they hurt people of every race, but predominantly Black and Hispanics, opportunities to pursue the right to earn a living, the fundamental right to earn a living. And that is why at Pacific Legal Foundation, we believe in opportunity, we believe in liberty for all people, no matter what race.
I'm a firm believer in that as well. And I'm thinking about the hair braiders. They have to get a cosmetology license and
threading eyebrows, braiding hair, all the rest of
Whatever.
that. And so patently, it looks like I'm seen a couple of these cases where Pacific Legal Foundation's wonderful attorneys have attacked this.
Good thing.
It looks to me, on the face of it, again, it's the government's stated objective, which is to protect the populace, protect consumers, but the actual outcome is that it simply protects one group from competition, and it makes entrance into any of these fields virtually impossible for people, especially people of color, because they can't afford to jump through all the hoops, they can't afford to pay all the permits, they can't afford to join the old boy network necessary to earn a living. So I absolutely agree.
There's
Absolutely.
one other form of abuse that I want to bring up here in the short time we have remaining. What did we learn from alcohol prohibition? The 18th Amendment in 1920 until repeal by the 21st Amendment in 1933.
We learned that the Kennedy family got filthy rich and could buy a presidency because of it.
Well,
you mean
that-
there's another lesson?
That was one thing, and violent crime, as soon as the mob realized they had potentially lucrative markets and a product, they did very well.
Same thing with drugs. When
The
they
same-
were
the
when they
war-
were made
the war
illegal.
on drugs
Yeah,
is
yeah.
disproportionately affecting some of these underprivileged communities, the ones that aren't getting an adequate education and are not learning some of the proper values. And there's a publication I strongly recommend. It is titled Chasing the Scream. You can look at the website chasingthescream.com. It's a great book by Johan Hari. Explains it from the first days to the last days of the war on drugs. Maybe humans will win that war. But thanks for joining us, folks. As you know, you can see us on Channel 17 of Access Sacramento, different channels for other cable broadcasters.
And accesssacramento.org.
If it's live at 8 o'clock Thursday, noon Friday, 4 a.m. Saturday, whoever.
My favorite time, 4 a.m.
Your favorite
Saturday.
time.
That's what I want to go on next.
And look on YouTube. Thanks for joining us once again.
Well, thank you for having us, Lee.
I'm glad you were here.